I stared into the face of Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm a person who suffered a traumatic shock and whose life was put on pause for over a decade as a result of that. I think it took so long for me to begin to put my puzzle back together because I had never met anyone suffering from trauma who was going through it because of the kind of shock I endured. You see, my initial shock came about because I accidentally stared directly into the face of the North American upright walking canid, or Dogman. My life was about as normal and boring as you could possibly imagine. I worked a job, I lived in a nice home in the suburbs with a nice wife, and I watched the most popular TV shows and sports. I really was incredibly predictable now that I look back on it, but my wife and I were good people. And then one morning, all of that changed unbelievably fast. I was up before dawn as usual, but for some reason I don't recall, my wife was up even earlier than that, and she beat me to the bathroom. So I was standing around groggy in our first floor bedroom, which was in the back of the house. We moved from that house years back, but at that time, we were living in a tiny home in a decent suburb of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I want it clear, this was not a wild area. This was a suburban neighborhood with houses and backyards. The biggest animal we had ever seen in our backyard was probably a robin or a cardinal. From the bathroom, my wife called out to me asking me if it was raining outside or not. The heavy drapes were drawn closed over our bedroom windows, so I went over to the closest one and drew them back quickly to look outside. What I saw outside that window changed everything about my life for years afterward. There was a dog standing outside my window for some reason. I don't know why it was there or what it had been doing, but when I opened the heavy drapes, he turned and stared right into my eyes. That was the moment I realized he was standing upright like a human. And that was the moment when my mind snapped. I don't understand why the look that creature gave me seemed to have melted my brain the way it did, and I felt deep anger and impatience with myself for years afterward because of it. Some people face a moment of crisis and rescue others from burning buildings, while I fell apart because there was a scary dog on the other side of my window. It doesn't make any sense to me why my reaction was so severe and so long-lasting. But in my defense, this was a truly nightmarish sight that greeted me, and it was the jump scare of all jump scares. The ground outside that bedroom window was about 2 feet lower than the floor in that bedroom, and yet I still had to look up a bit to meet the creature's eyes. I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'2", so you tell me how tall that thing out there was. It had yellow or golden-colored eyes that seemed to sort of glow. They were hard to look into. I don't know for a fact that this animal was intelligent, but when it looked at me, it looked through me. I felt like it was looking at my soul. It was a shattering moment somehow, and that part no therapist has ever been able to explain to me. Why did it feel like the Dogman was judging me in that moment and finding me lacking? While most people who come face to snout with the Dogman seem to feel they've encountered a savage wild beast, I felt more like I got stared down by a savage, vicious, animalistic, and fierce, yet superior being. I think that creature was just as smart as the smartest man who ever lived. It's just that his was a natural intelligence. His brilliance was in killing and eating, and those are talents I now think nature values above most of what humanity sees as virtuous. Rather than coming away with a feeling that the Dogman was a physically superior yet mentally inferior animal, I felt that I had encountered my better. He just had a different value system than humanity's, and if he was the superior being, then maybe his value system was superior too. You can see how this line of thinking would lead to stagnation and immobility in one's life. I don't think I had had enough mystery in my boring and normal, predictable life before that night, and then suddenly, I had too much mystery. I had prided myself on fitting in, on watching all the most popular things to watch, on having the most popular opinions. And then, with that one searing glance, that Dogman obliterated my value system. He didn't care if Twitter agreed with him. He didn't care if he got enough likes on Facebook. That Dogman was more of an adult than I was. That Dogman made all his own choices, for his own reasons, without explaining why to anyone or asking anyone's opinion. That Dogman had more freedom than I did, and he seemed to have made far more worthy life choices than I had as well. He was the dog, and yet I was the one living the life of a pet, while he was a truly free man. They say Houdini, the magician and escape artist, used to be able to take any sort of blow to his belly, his solar plexus, and withstand it. One time he got hit when he was unprepared, though, and it allegedly led to his early demise. Well, I was unprepared to see that Dogman in that location at that moment in time, and I paid a severe price for it. It wasn't until 2017 when a friend of a friend set up a meeting for me with a man who also had a Dogman sighting. He didn't seem as damaged by his encounter. He was out in the woods when he had his experience, and I think that was why he was better prepared for it when it happened to him. Let's call this guy Jed, which is not his real name. Jed was hiking with a buddy when the two of them heard a growling sound and stopped walking. Through some trees and foliage in front of them came a huge bull Dogman, the largest canine they had ever seen. It pushed two trees apart and bared its teeth, clearly telling Jed and his friend to back off, which they slowly but surely did. Not wanting to challenge the bull Dogman, who he told me had to be 11 feet tall if he was an inch, the two of them kept their movements slow and quiet. They also averted their eyes from the giant upright dog's eyes, and that was when Jed noticed what was really going on. There were other, smaller canines on the other side of those trees. He wasn't sure if they were being warned off by the mother of some younger Dogman, or possibly the father. It's the kind of behavior you'd expect from a mother bear, but the Dogman they encountered certainly seemed male to them. The way Jed put it was, if that was the mama, then the papa must have been as tall as Godzilla. So if that was a male, then it might possibly be evidence that male Dogmen at least sometimes participate in the raising of the young. And then again, it might just have been one very big mama. It felt amazing to talk to him. It didn't upset me at all. In fact, it was exciting to have someone to share this forbidden knowledge and experience with. Soon, Jed introduced me to more Dogman witnesses, and I met others through them. The more people I met who had seen one of the creatures, the better I found I was sleeping at night, and the more normal my daytimes started to become. It wasn't even like I was working on getting better. It was more like one day I woke up and realized things weren't as bad as they had once been. Sanity and normality sort of crept up on me in a boring way, and there was no single key moment where I felt I had recovered. It was more like one day I noticed that it had already happened. So my advice for you, if you've had an experience with a large predator of any sort, whether it be Dogman, Sasquatch, or even a man-eater that's officially known to science, is to seek out others who've gone through similar experiences to yourself. First of all, you'll feel a lot less crazy when you know a few people who've walked a mile in your moccasins, figuratively speaking. I'm not gonna lie to you, I still have nightmares about that Dogman, and it still overwhelms me on occasion. But I have a support group around me. My wife now understands better why this hit me so hard, and it's reached the point where the fear of the Dogman long ago stopped me from living my fullest life. In fact, let's face it, if it hadn't been for this trauma, I'd probably still be asleep. I'd probably still be a conformist, sleepwalking through life, watching what others watch, and thinking what others think. I found that living life, really waking up and living life, can be painful and sometimes unpleasant. But I've also discovered that there's so much more to everything if you allow yourself to be truly alive. Yes, that means the pain hurts more, but it also means you feel the joy that much more deeply as well. As much as I lost in my life when I was first traumatized by seeing that beast man outside the window, that's how much I've gained in my life since I've learned to accept all this. You might say I sort of experienced a death and rebirth, in a sense. And it's all because I stared into the face of a Dogman. Wildcat, werewolf, wolverine, queen. The most badass you've ever seen. If you're impressed, well, that's the plan for the great Kathy Barrick man. We thought we lost our wildcat, werewolf, wolverine, queen, but she's turned up safe and sound in a new home. We'd like to congratulate her on her new home and hope that life can start to move in a fun direction for Kathy and for all of us. Kathy, of course, gets all our perks and you can receive them all too. Our TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of this extra long episode to explain all the deets of how you can help us stay online while getting to watch our super secret, completely uncensored Dogman stories far too wild to ever run on this channel. But before Hank comes out here, we've got a whole bunch more Dogman stories for you, including this very special one. 3 underground Dogman stories. Dear Scary Stories NYC, as some of your viewers may already know, there are a vast number of underground caverns and tunnels deep under every one of the 48 original states. Some are natural, some man-made, and some a combination of both. But I've either experienced or heard of Dogman sightings in almost every kind of space that exists somewhere under the feet of everyday people. I used to have a very expensive hobby which involved traveling the world and exploring various underground rooms and passages. I'm going to pass on 2 supposedly true stories which were told to me by 2 other underground explorers, and then I'm going to tell you about my own personal underground Dogman experience. Get ready and hold on tight so that you don't fall out of the car, because this is likely to turn into a roller coaster along the way. Each of these 3 Dogman encounters and sightings took place in an underground area that the witness may not have had any legal right to be in. We don't actually always know if we are on government property, private property, or a location entirely abandoned to the public. But we know we have not been invited to explore in those places, and for that reason, the precise locations of these 3 narratives have to be omitted from these retellings. I will say that I'm limiting myself to stories originating from the Midwest of the United States in this email. All of these took place essentially in the Great Lakes region, and south of there, but north of Mexico. I do not recommend following in my footsteps, as this kind of life is a dangerous one, and although I've never been arrested, quite possibly of questionable legality. However, if I could learn about these locations, then anyone can, since I had no special quality about myself in those days, other than a genuine and deep curiosity about what exists under our feet. First, I want to tell you Walter and Abel's story about the werewolf in the elevator shaft. There is a park in the Midwest with hills and thick forests, inside which my 2 hiking friends Walter and Abel discovered a metallic, circular covering in the ground that strongly resembled a New York City manhole cover, or a manhole cover from any large city basically. It had been there for so long that it had become encrusted with dirt, and only the very center of it was partially visible. They picked at it until they poked through a hole in the manhole and could see that it covered a very deep, very dark hole in the ground. They had thought they were in the middle of nowhere, but obviously mankind had been there long before and even set up an underground world beneath their feet. They really had to hack and dig at the hard encrusting of dirt long ago turned hard as rock that held the manhole cover in place before it began to budge. Eventually it was lifted, revealing a metallic ladder built into a stone wall leading down into darkness. Walter and Abel were in that park to have an adventure, and although they had not planned on having an underground adventure, they did have flashlights with fresh batteries and a deep sense of curiosity about the world, so down into the darkness they both went. When they got to the bottom, there was a long hallway with water running down the center of it like a stream. They figured they must have lowered themselves into an old drainage system, or sewer, built under the government-run parks very long ago. After walking for a while using the lights of their flashlights, however, the two were surprised to find the door marked Offices. It was unlocked, and on the other side was a short staircase and hallway with white walls and a gray tiled floor. At the far end of the hall was an ancient-looking water cooler with no water left in it. To the right of that were some cubicles arranged in between offices with doors on them. I asked them where they thought they were, like what were they underneath, and neither man really understood where they were. Before that place was a park, it was still a wild area. It was never some place you could easily commute to in order to hold down an office job. Walter said he found a 1967 calendar on the wall of one office, and Abel said he found a desk calendar from 1952 in another. Everything was covered in dust, as though the rooms had been abandoned long ago, and suddenly there were files on desks and file cabinets everywhere, and the men realized the answers to their questions were most likely in those files, which they aimed to read once they had figured out the layout of the offices. Eventually, the two happened upon an elevator bank and wondered if their answers might be more easily found there than in a lot of reading. The elevator doors opened onto empty shafts, but there was a light coming from inside those shafts. Possibly they might open to the sky. So the men leaned into the opened elevator doors and looked upward, trying to figure out where they were or what was going on. And then, I can't remember if it was Walter or Abel, but one of them stuck his head into a shaft just as this beast was climbing up the shaft from below. Apparently their conversation had gotten a little loud, and someone was coming upstairs to investigate. The thing is, this particular angry old complaining neighbor had a dog head on his mostly humanoid body. I hear people these days talking about dogmen bigger than bears, but I never heard that kind of thing back in my day. This was the size of a large man, and by that I mean maybe 6 foot or 6'2", 6'3". An animal that size is already going to be 5 or 10 times stronger than a human being equal in weight and height. We are the weaklings of the natural world and would have gone extinct long ago without our brains and our thumbs. You don't need to tell me that a werewolf is 10 or 15 feet tall in order to scare me. One that's my size with dog fangs and monster claws, that's more than a match for me, even if I'm armed and wearing armor of some kind. If you ever run into a dogman or a werewolf, even if it's a half a foot shorter than you, you're still gonna feel overmatched. Just take my word for it. So this savage wild man with a head that literally looks like a feral wolf climbs up out of the elevator shaft, and my two friends said it was like their brains just melted onto that underground tunnel floor. Not to mention their bladders. Walter and Abel ran back the way they had come, and up and out of the tunnel. Then they proceeded to get out of the area completely. The story bothered them, and they kept talking about it to others for a few years. The man was a dog at the same time. He looked like a wolf man or a werewolf, and he lived in that abandoned tunnel system with offices in it. Actually, he lived on the floor underneath. I asked them if we could return to the location so I could see this for myself. and then they told me they had already tried that. They returned to the location with more men and with the means to protect themselves, but that manhole cover leading down didn't seem to even be in that dirt any longer. They were certain they located the right place, but no matter how deep they dug, all that was there was dirt. Removing and covering that manhole cover is not something that animals could have done. Somehow, human beings must have found out that they broke into those abandoned offices, and for some reason, it became high priority enough to remove that manhole cover. Who knows what else was removed, and who knows what became of those tunnels and offices. Certainly not Walter and Abel. My second story has to do with an underground system from a different location in the Midwest. If I revealed the entrance location for this one, you just wouldn't believe me, unless you've been there already. This one hides in plain sight in a far more populated area than the one I just told you about, or the one I'll conclude with after this story. Nevertheless, once you enter this inner world, you leave the modern life behind spectacularly quickly. Talk about need to know. Only the creme de la creme of hobos and miscreants hang out in this location. To be honest, I have a few Dogman stories from this area, but they all have the same vibe as this one. And I think I have chosen the scariest of them all to tell you. Any of these stories from this place, though, could all basically be called the Staring Dogman. This is a particularly stupid place to want to venture into, and yet, as I said, it attracts the intellectual kind of homeless and weirdos. The electricity and lights are on in these tunnels. For one thing, they must either be government or privately owned, since someone is keeping the lights on down there. Other than that, it does appear to have been abandoned long ago. Possibly the lights were left on by accident and are paid for by our tax dollars. If it's private, though, then maybe your pension plan is being spent to keep those lights on, I don't know. In either case, the Dogman sightings down there all have one oddity in common. The lights seem to go dim around wherever the Dogman stands. I've heard more than one person tell me that if you see the light dimming ahead of you down a tunnel in that underground place, just assume it's the Dogman and leave. The quintessential version of the Dogman story from here is that there is a creature man standing bipedally and staring straight forward intensely. It growls and puffs itself up, showing its fangs and claws, adopting menacing poses toward something in the dark. At the feet of the Dogman always lies what appears to be a victim of the beast. I can't really speak to that, according to YouTube rules, so use your imagination. The Dogman appears to have defeated someone or something, which lies at his canine feet, while he appears to be posturing and threatening towards some other unseen presence off in the darkness. I don't remember anyone actually seeing what the Dogman was seeing, but that might be because they all just sort of backed out when they came upon this kind of a scene. Now, some people think those sightings are residual hauntings. They say the Dogman wasn't really there. It was just a replay, a stone recording playing back a scene of high intensity that happened on that spot many years ago. I have not had it happen to me personally, so that's a hard one for me to judge. I will say that I did explore these tunnels a bit, but the feeling that I must be trespassing limited my adventures to one short night. I never saw anything out of the ordinary in there, but I will admit, the place has an incredibly charged and very weird vibe. So now we're up to my own personal Dogman sighting, which I have to say was the single most terrifying and trippy thing that I've ever lived through. It almost drove me insane, completely mad. I intensely dislike therapy. But I've been in therapy ever since the day I saw not one, but this whole family of Dogmen, and I thought I was going to end up on their dinner menu. This happened in a state park not far from Lake Michigan, but it might as well have taken place in outer space or in ancient times. It's just that odd a narrative. I can't tell you about the entrance to this particular tunnel system because I do believe it's still right there where it was when I convinced some people I will call A and B to take me there. There's a modern entrance leading to modern underground tunnels, leading to staircases, leading to stairwells with more staircases, leading to tunnels, and then the brickwork on the tunneling ceases. And then you find yourself walking through tunnels that look like they were carved by hand out of the rock itself. These tunnels are not tall, and they are not wide. If you're claustrophobic, you're going to want to turn around and go back. It feels like a maze in there, but it really isn't, as you're never presented with any options except to go forward or back. And then everything changes, and there are tunnels and rooms lit from some unseen source. The method of carving out these spaces is very different from anything we had walked through up till that moment. This area appears far more ancient, and reminded me of the first 1968 Planet of the Apes movie. It also reminded me of those very ancient tunnels they found in the Middle East. I think it was Turkey? But I was in America, so this entire experience felt incredibly psychedelic to me. The way I could see without my flashlight made no sense. At first I was looking around for the light source, but in the years since then, I've wondered if the air itself down there may have helped all of us to see. What if there is some kind of intoxicant or mind alterant in that air so deep underground? What if it relaxes your retina? What if it allows more light in than normal? I've heard that some psychedelics do something like that, although it's not something I've experimented in personally, unless I did unwittingly when I was inside that very ancient-looking cave system. We entered a space within the caverns where I could hear in the dark that we were alarming individuals who were there before us. I personally apologized before I could see who it was that we had disturbed, but my apology was cut short by snarling and growling coming from several different directions at once. Focusing my eyes and my attention quickly, I saw that we were being confronted and soon would be surrounded by a pack of naked, dog-headed ape men who were maybe 5 or 5.5 foot tall each. These were like welterweight boxers covered in dog fur and with heads like some sort of prehistoric wolf. And yet, they stood there on their hind legs, making it clear that my party would pass no further. We were sort of in that moment before you know a chase scene is about to start, and we were just staring at each other in surprise. I mean, I would not have expected to find that werewolves were real, and I don't think they knew humans were real either. The people, A and B, who had brought me there were unaware that there were any intelligent life forms or large predators inside that cave system, but the family of Dogman seemed eager to educate them on the subject. There was a tall and athletic-looking one who seemed the most agitated, like he had been given caffeine in his Alpo. He was the one I was most afraid of, and yet he stood behind this gray-furred, thinner beast man, who I guessed must have been the eldest. Maybe he was even the father of the other two for all I knew. There was a third beast man toward the back. He was a little chubby. He growled and hissed and snarled, but I noticed he remained to the rear and seemed to be hoping we would just run away. Maybe now you get it why I was a little bit more concerned about Coffee Boy fidgeting and bouncing around between the other two. I felt as though the only reason he wasn't attempting to slice us to ribbons was the older one holding him back. A and B whispered to me that whatever I did, I should not run. So I ran. I ran at top speed, and I heard A and B running after me. Soon, they were screaming at me to run faster. I heard screams of pain as the wolves occasionally were able to catch up to B for a second here and a few seconds there. He was in the worst shape of the three of us physically when we made it back to the man-made parts of that tunnel system, Or modern man-made, I suppose I should say, since I don't really have any idea who or what carved out the deeper parts of those caves. I was in the worst state emotionally, as I fell into a deep crying jag as soon as we were safe. I was fine while running away. I was fine while escaping. But once we seemed safe, then I was an emotional wreck. This was many years ago, but I told you already, I still see a therapist, and we mainly discuss only this and the other subjects that talking about this brings up. In some ways, my mental life was destroyed in that cave. I wake up screaming, dreaming that I'm back inside the cave and that I'm suffocating from lack of air. I'm very afraid of being in rooms or hallways that have no windows in them. I have never gone into a cave or tunnel system again. I was cured of my curiosity on that day. I'm claustrophobic, and I'm paranoid. And it's all because I took the shock of that Dogman experience a little harder than I would have liked to have taken it. Consciously, I'm fine about it. It's really only my unconscious that's being a dick about everything. I could even joke about it. The three of us in the years since our escape from that cave have even named the three Dogmen, as they were different enough in appearance for us to tell them apart. The gray-haired one, which we perceived as the oldest, we named Lon after Lon Chaney Sr. The hairy and wily one we named Lon after Lon Chaney Jr., the famous movie Wolfman. And the chubby one we named Lon after Lon Strickler, creator of the Amazing Phantoms and Monsters blog. Lon, and Lon continue to give me nightmares to this day, but joking about it makes it feel less terrible, I guess. Thank you for letting me share these stories with you. It felt good to get them off my chest. I'm too old to have underground adventures anymore, even if I hadn't developed this Dogman-related set of phobias. But I'm still young enough to warn you to be careful if you're crazy enough to attempt to follow in my footsteps or those of my contemporaries. By all means, follow your passions and curiosities, but don't let yourself be taken by surprise. If you're rooting around in hidden or abandoned places, you're going to come across individuals who want to be left alone. And sometimes, just sometimes, those individuals are individual Dogman. Our executive producer is Celeste Shearer. Badass like a magic mirror. Abracadabra, this episode is brought to you by Celeste Shearer, who gets our fancy pants perks in return. So can you, mere mortal. Yes, you too can join Celeste Shearer among the pantheon of the greats. The Dogman that visited my basement. Dear Scary Stories, NYC. I once had a direct experience where I was face to face with the Wisconsin werewolf kind of a Dogman, right inside my own house. It was a long time ago, but believe me, the memories are still fresh enough that I think I could retell the story every day I remain on this planet with the rest of you. At the time, I was living in a house in the woods I rented just outside the small town of Aniwa, Wisconsin, which is near the Plover River State Fishery area. I mean, it's just some of the most beautiful nature that you'll ever be lucky enough to breathe the fresh air of. Aniwa itself is really just a collection of some houses with a post office and a bar, but the people were always friendly to me, and I once bought some furniture from a store over there. My encounter didn't happen in Aniwa, though. Like I said, my house was off in the woods. It was small, and you might even call it a cabin more than a house. I did have plumbing and a septic tank, but the only electricity was provided when I would run the gas generator. This was back in the 1990s, and I rented the place to write the great American novel. I was still typing on my old non-electric manual typewriter that my mother gave me as a gift on my 18th birthday. Even in the 1990s, it had already started to get difficult to find the ink ribbons for that thing, so I mail-ordered boxes of them in advance. Eventually, they were phased completely out, and I had to learn to use computers like everyone else. But I held out till almost the year 2000 before I joined the modern world. Back then, I only ran the generator on rare occasions, even using old-school candle flame lanterns at night, and the fireplace for heat and cooking whenever possible. Other than the running water and the toilet, I was living kind of like Abe Lincoln in the old log house, and I was loving it. I think I was writing the book more slowly than usual, just because I enjoyed being out in the woods so much. And then came the day when the forest itself reminded me that nobody should ever allow themselves to get too comfortable in the woods. Now, what I did was stupid, and I caused this to happen through my carelessness. I was in the basement rearranging the remnants of left-behind materials from previous residents. I organized some, I threw out others. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a fire trap down there. When I left to walk to my burning spot and burn some of the junk, I left the door to the basement stairs opened up to the woods. Anyone or anything could just walk into my basement while I was off burning the garbage. And guess what? Anyone or anything did just that. So after I finished my business, I walked back to the house and only then noticed that the basement door in the back of the house was opened up onto our lawn. I closed it and locked it, and then I went inside to have dinner and go to bed. More than once that night, I woke up to the distinct impression that someone was banging around in the small basement and root cellar down underneath me. The first time, I just thought that was an odd nightmare to have. The second time, I wondered why I kept dreaming of someone banging in the basement. And the third time, it was just starting to get light outside, and the banging was loud and long enough that it woke me up. I could feel it that third time. I wasn't just hearing it anymore. Someone or something seemed to really be banging around down there. I sat in bed, waiting and listening for it to happen again, and it did not. That actually ramped up my courage, and I decided I wanted to go look down there and see what was happening. I lit a lantern, and I went outside, and I unlocked that basement door. A waft of nasty-smelling, musky air hit me, and I knew at once there had to be some kind of large animal down there. Now this was that dark part of the morning when the sun is still in the process of climbing up in the sky. You can see colors up there, but it's still pretty dark. It's still mostly nighttime. What would have made sense to do would be to leave the door open as I had done the day before and allow the creature, whatever it was, to leave on its own time and solve the problem for me. I did not do that. I curiously and foolishly held my lantern in front of me and started walking down those steps to that basement storage area, completely unarmed. Don't try this at home, kids. I'm lucky I even made it to the bottom before the creature revealed itself to me. There was growling. Just atmospheric growling all around me, it seemed. It was almost as though the basement itself, or the dirt it was dug out of, were somehow angry at me. The air itself felt angry, and my legs froze in position as fear overwhelmed and gripped me hard. Out of the shadows walked something big and hairy, but bipedal. I thought I was seeing a bear with mange at first, as I don't know what else is that big and hairy and stands up like people do. As it came out of the darkness into the light, however, I was overcome with the smell of wet dog, and I realized this was some form of canine. The growling now sounded like a dog to me as well. The next time someone tells you that Dogman is really a bear with mange being misidentified, tell them my story, where I actually thought I was seeing a bear with mange, but then the creature turned out to be something entirely different. Not a bear at all, but some subspecies of canine, as large as a bear and similarly capable of traveling on their hind legs like a human being does. I'm gonna try to remember for you every detail of the creature's appearance now. In the moment, I really was not studying it, and I was not thinking that I would have to remember the details to tell this story again later. I was just thinking that I was gonna die, and that this thing was going to end my life. And, as much as I wanted to faint on the spot and give up, I had to muster up the strength and courage to run away. Forgive me if I leave details out or whatever, because I really only looked at this creature for a few seconds, illuminated by the light of an old candle-lit handheld lantern in a dark basement. On the other hand, some people complain when I give too many details, saying that proves that it couldn't be real. So I don't know what to tell you, except the bits and pieces that I can remember. This creature was dark. It had dark fur. It seemed to have dark skin. Its nose leather was black. The fur may have been gray or a dull brown in the daylight, but it just looked black in the limited lighting. It gave an impression of being like a gorilla or a chimp to me very briefly, and I would say that was mainly because of the color of the fur. It was not as bulky as a great ape, though. It was thinner and all muscle. It looked like the creature was massively strong and had no body fat on it at all. It also stood up straight, which is not something I've seen gorillas or other kinds of simians do. They tend to slump, from what I've seen. This dog-headed ape, however, seemed to have excellent posture. My kindergarten teacher would have given him a star for standing up straight. That was how good his posture was. And I had to tilt my head back to look up at his dog head, even when I stood on the bottom step to the basement. That means it was very tall, and much taller than I was. And that evil dog head, way above me in the darkness, glared at me with eyes lit up in a glow of pure hatred. Even in the dark, its huge set of meat-eating teeth glowed nearly as brightly as the eyes did, and I could smell its dead animal breath wafting down to me. I remember being so scared that I lost my coordination. I turned to run back up those stairs, and in the process I dropped my lantern. It smashed somewhere beneath those stairs, and I saw flames spreading as the lamp's oil covered the basement floor. Having no choice, I continued my clumsy run up those stairs, hearing the great beast roar in horror behind me. Once I was upstairs, I ran to the left, got myself inside of the cabin, locked and bolted the door behind me, then watched out that back window. The massive creature ran up the stairs literally covered in flames, its back entirely on fire. In the early morning light, the animal still appeared black to me, or at least a very dark gray. It was taller than a man, over 7 feet, yet it did not look like a basketball player covered in fur. It looked like Batman, like a giant Batman, the way it had such a massive chest and those tall pointed ears up on top of its head. But this was an animal. It wasn't a human being at all. I was watching a genuine monster, and I was watching him, caught on fire. It screamed an ungodly moan as it ran with greater speed than I'd ever seen any creature exhibit, and I saw the flames being wicked away as the creature tore into the forest. It was already not on fire before it hit the tree line, and it had never stopped, dropped, or rolled. Just the speed with which it ran was enough to douse the flames, and the creature was gone and out of my life as quickly as it had arrived. The rest of the morning was me and the hose hosing down the basement and getting those flames out. The landlord gave me the option of rebuilding the staircase myself or paying for him to hire someone, as he blamed me for the fire damage. Since I had left the basement door open and let that creature in, I really couldn't argue the point. My carelessness had allowed a wild animal into his house, and destruction occurred as a result. So, that year I learned how to build a staircase. It's a skill I'm still quite proud of, although I've never ever had a chance to use that skill again in all the years since then. But at least I know that if I need to, I can hammer some stairs together. And if I ever need to call upon the skills I learned that year, I know I can thank the Dogman that visited my basement. Whether you're a loosey-goose or maybe a controller, I am here to bring the news that we thank Deborah Areola. Yes, please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Deborah Areola, for making this episode possible. In exchange, Deborah gets to see our secret, uncensored Dogman stories Far Too Wild to run on this channel. And there are other perks too, all of which you can access. Dogman vs. Dinosaur, Lost World in Louisiana. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a crazy story for you. In fact, it's the craziest story I have to tell. I did live a life of adventure until I met my wife and settled down at the age of 27. But nothing that I ever got myself involved with was ever half as crazy as this one time I met a man who showed me both a dogman, which he called a werewolf, and an apparent dinosaur that most closely compared to a T-Rex. This was back in the 1970s, which was an era in which I met an awful lot of completely unique and strange individuals. I knew some for a while, but most of them drifted into and out of my life in days, hours, or even moments. I'm not sure what to compare it to in modern terms, but I think we probably used to talk to each other more than people do now. There was more of an exchange of ideas. Instead of tweeting slogans at each other, we made eye contact and shared ideas more openly than we're allowed to any longer. In this way, I met my wife, who is still my best friend even as I type this. In this same way, however, I met villains, con artists, and even this one fairly terrifying wizard or sorcerer, or maybe he was a brujo. The man who first introduced us told me that the wizard was a student of Carlos Castaneda, but the second time I was introduced, I was informed that this man was a contemporary of Castaneda, which is a different thing, obviously. I listened to him when he spoke, and I considered his words, but I wasn't sure if he was a true wise man or a charlatan and con man doing a long-term scam. I'm really not that smart at spotting con men in advance, and I'm not good at thinking 12 steps ahead, so con men can always easily make mincemeat of me if I allow them into my life. It led to me being a bit paranoid from an early age, and sort of suspicious of everybody. Nevertheless, I hadn't caught the wizard in any outright lies yet, so even though I was almost certain he couldn't be for real, I continued to give him the benefit of the doubt. One night at a campfire, the wizard began speaking openly about how he could tell that I didn't believe him. I said that wasn't so, but he countered that I was only being polite. That was true. He was now telling the truth, and I was becoming the liar. The next thing I knew, the bunch of us were piling in someone's van, and the wizard was directing the van owner to drive. He said he had something to show us. We were heading toward the southwest of Louisiana, which is a lot of farmland and wetlands, plus wetlands being used for farmland, like they have rice fields over there. I felt anxious, as though these strange people were driving me out of the populated areas, so that nobody would ever find my body. On the drive through the night, this girl, whose name I can't remember, started shouting and pointing, saying that she saw a rougarou running alongside the road. We all jumped to look, of course, as a rougarou or lougarou is a Louisiana-flavored dogman or werewolf. I had been hearing about them since I was a kid, and I always wondered if they were for real or not. To be honest, I placed the probability as more likely than Santa Claus, but less likely than Bigfoot. To me, the rougarou stood about as much chance of being real as I felt the Loch Ness Monster did. That was just my worldview as I grew up. Well, I didn't see anything out that window, nor did anyone else. The girl said it ran behind something as we moved over to look at it. None of us doubted her, but it was disappointing not to see for ourselves. She said it was running on 2 legs and it wore no clothing. It was covered in fur like an animal and had a dog's head. She didn't remember more details than that, I don't think. Oh, and it was dark-colored and had triangular-shaped ears like a canine. I don't remember her talking about the arms or the legs other than that the creature was upright and it was running. So I figured that was some kind of magic trick or head game thought up by our sorcerer friend, but he didn't turn around to drive back home. Instead, we drove on toward the main act of his show. Now, I can't really explain this except to say that it had to have been a trick of some sort, in one way or another. It seemed as though we were driving along looking at empty fields of various crops, and then suddenly we were driving up toward a rice field which was very much occupied. The first thing we noticed was the largest. There was a big old dinosaur out there which I suppose may very well have been a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or possibly a living recreation made like in that movie by mixing dinosaur DNA with bird DNA. I want to say that if I had a camera and took still pictures, you'd probably identify it as a T-Rex or a close relative of the same. When it was moving, though, it did not look like a dinosaur in terms that we think of dinosaurs from the movies. I tell people that it moved more like a giant chicken than like anything from a Steven Spielberg movie, and that makes people laugh. They don't think that sounds very scary. They think it sounds humorous. Well, it is actually very scary. In the movies, T-Rex seems way more intelligent, way more relatable than the monster we saw in that field. This one had the brainless, soulless eyes of a chicken. It seemed as dumb as a wall. Imagine sheer killing power with zero intelligence behind it. And then you might begin to understand how frightening that big thing was. Now, we drove up way too close to the field and could see that the dinosaur bird creature was engaged in some sort of battle with a troll or a bugbear or something that looked totally out of Dungeons and Dragons. I was thinking it was a Bigfoot or maybe a mountain giant, but as we parked, we could all see that this was a dog-legged, dog-headed creature. If you're in Louisiana looking at a dog-headed man, the local custom is to interpret what you're seeing as a lougarou or rougarou. The girl who had seen the creature earlier confirmed that this was the same one, or at least one that looked identical to the one she saw. It looked for the most part just the same as that gray Dogman you use in your thumbnails, although I remember its fur being thicker and more even overall. It had those canine legs that it stood on. It had large clawed paws that very nearly resembled hands. Its demon eyes glowed a sort of golden color. It was the most terrifying sight I hope to ever witness, other than the dinosaur seeking to bite that Dogman's head off. I was frozen to my seat. I think my body temperature was in negative degrees. The legend my parents told me was that the rougarou were all witches or sorcerers, just like our host, the wizard, claimed he was. Could there be truth to the legends after all? If this was fake, it certainly was an elaborate show being put on just for the car full of us young losers. Was this the result of hypnotism? Power of suggestion? A laser holographic light show starring Tupac and Frank Zappa? I still don't want to accept what we saw at face value, but so far, all the other possible explanations sound even crazier than just thinking that it might have all been real. Some of us piled out of the van, but I was a bigger chicken than that T-Rex out there. I remained in the van, but I watched through a window that I occasionally heated up with my own steam from the panicked excitement. I for one felt that this was a bad place to park. I wanted to go home, and the others laughed at me. What I saw outside that steamed-up window was a dinosaur that was twice as tall as the werewolf or rougarou he seemed to be facing off against. That rougarou, in turn, seemed to be about twice the size of the human beings who had driven me out there to show me all this. I felt like I had gotten drawn into a suicide cult. That overgrown pigeon with 6-inch long fangs was going to eat all of us, assuming he had brought his appetite with him. We were all doomed, and I whined like an infant as I watched the battle unfold. At first, the T-Rex had the advantage that you would expect him to have. He was far larger, and his jaws were so big that they could bite that Dogman in half if they managed to close tight around him. Of course, they never once did that, and the big bird-like T-Rex began to run out of energy sooner than his opponent. I wondered if he was cold-blooded like a reptile or warm-blooded like mammals and birds. As the larger beast became more sluggish, the werewolf man was able to leap up onto his shoulders and ride him. This seemed hysterically funny to the wizard and his friends. I was witnessing this horrible-looking half-man, half-wolf ride a chickensaurus. I felt nauseous. I didn't want to see anymore. This was sensory overload for me. The Dogman rode that bucking T-Rex away into the night, and everyone piled back in the van, chattering excitedly. People peppered the wizard with questions, and I could tell they were all hooked. He had caught all of them. They would do what he said now in order to see more, in order to become more. I, on the other hand, was terrified and shaken up by the entire experience. I tried to act normal and interested as the sorcerer explained that the rougarou who bested that huge monster in front of our eyes was another wizard like the one lecturing us. We, too, could become the rougarou. I've read that there are some clubs that you get invited into and you have no choice but to say yes. I wondered if this was one of those kinds of clubs. For that reason, I said yes to anything they asked me or told me. And then after we parted company, I went home, packed, and hopped on a bus to a place I hoped they would never think to look. I just ghosted on the entire crowd. I left overnight. It wasn't the first time I had dropped everything and moved. In fact, I had got myself into trouble a couple of times before and had to start over. It wouldn't be too much after this when my wife would catch me and domesticate me. This was the last time I pulled the Great Escape. These days, my own son tells me he would have joined the cult. He says the chance to become a rougarou yourself is something only a nincompoop would pass on. I don't know where he got that word nincompoop from, but that's what he called me. I remind him, if I were a rougarou, he would never have been born, because I would never have met his mother. His response is that he might have been the son of the rougarou if I weren't so short-sighted and so chicken. Now my wife, on the other hand, she thinks that wizard dude must have slipped us some ayahuasca or something, and that we were all just tripping. She doesn't believe one word when I tell the story of Dogman versus Dinosaur, Lost World in Louisiana. She's Shelia and she's Paulette. She's the best that you can get. She's way cooler than an Amazon hobbit. She's Shelia and Paulette and Roberts. Please join us in thanking this episode's executive producer Shelia Paulette Roberts for making this episode possible. In return, she receives our perks like our secret uncensored Sunday Dogman stories. Here's international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the deeds. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.